Hi everyone, welcome to Lesson 10. As you know, we will not be having the traditional live session this unit, but I wanted to record a presentation and allow it to be posted online so that we could go over some of the concepts this week, but we can chat about the particulars within the discussion unit. With regard to updates for Lesson 10, if you have questions this week, please either email them or share them in the discussion area. And as you know, the assignment this week is to work towards your final project, but to answer the discussion question. And it is a little less lengthy than in the past, primarily because I know you are working on your final assignment, and we want to allow you time to do that. Our goals in this short seminar are to discuss operational improvements and then to give some additional thought to the discussion question that's posted for the week. Operational improvements, as you've read so far, are a requirement for most organizations, and they do require continuous effort. They can be part of Six Sigma, Lean, TQM, all we've discussed, or they can be completely apart or separate from one of these three methodologies. It's entirely possible that an organization will undergo a process of continual improvement, perhaps even from its inception, without using one of the three methodologies. And we also know that operational improvements can really drive growth and profitability, not just by removing waste, but by really streamlining the operations on a continuous basis so that as our business grows or changes, our operations can change along with it. We spend a lot of money, time, and effort, which of course all goes back to money, in a business or organization, focusing on Lean and Six Sigma or possibly TQM. But if we make the effort and it doesn't stick, it's really been a waste of resources, unfortunately. This does tend to happen, particularly as an organization matures or a product line plateaus. Many researchers and practitioners believe that the way to do this, to maintain continual operational improvements, is to focus on the soft side of Lean and Six Sigma to maintain the edge. And I'll talk just in a minute here about what that means. Companies will tend to set their sights a little too low or not use tools to match new processes. So we might implement a new process but not have a tool to manage it or to maintain or track it. Managers also may delegate change and lean activity just to experts, contractors, or Six Sigma black belts and heavily rely on them without having the skills themselves to understand what it is they're undertaking. And while these people, the experts, for example, do have skills, of course, to implement, they perhaps don't have the authority or capability to make the changes stick long-term at the organization. And so they tend to not be the individuals that should be making long-term operational improvements. Our goal when we undertake any operational endeavor to, whether it's to improve quality, to improve customer experience, to remove defects, to shorten development or production cycles, to remove waste, and so on, is to set very high standards, set and communicate key goals, and understand where and how culture is going to play a role in whether or not those goals are attained. So be sure that you're not misreading the mindset of employees or the culture of the organization. I once had a boss who told me that he does absolutely nothing in terms of changes for the first 90 days when he comes into a new business, precisely for this reason. It's very easy to misread how people feel, particularly if you're new to the business, or they consider you the boss and you hold their job in your hand, and so they may or may not be completely direct with you. Making change happen, putting what you learn into action. So develop line manager lean leadership skills is important, and we do tend to focus on that. So the line leadership or line workers will tend to be trained in one of the processes. But we also have to train management on hard and soft skills so that culture and individuals are also accounted for. That whole concept that we hire the whole person, that whole person doesn't just change overnight when we decide to become operationally efficient. We also need to lead through the line, which means all employees. We talked about this many times in the past, from C-level to janitors, need to think and work differently. So after the low-hanging fruit is picked, that's when enthusiasm can tend to wane, or we can tend to settle back into old ways of doing things. It reminds me very much of just pretty much any type of relationship when we become complacent. And the goal is to continually improve so that the changes that we made initially stick. And in addition, we can account for changes in the business that need to occur or that have occurred in our process, which often happens. The McKinsey Institute has some excellent resources on helping to reinforce lean and encourage its stickiness. For example, some habits to reinforce in management to create a more sticky process. One is to focus on operating processes. Senior managers should be visible and understand how processes and functional areas work. So, what this means is that management shouldn't just stay in their office and not really visit the production floor. I remember the first time I went to our plant in France in a small town called Lille, and the production managers just sat in literally glass boxes above the production line. And they never really got down into the nitty gritty with the workers and tried to understand what it is they do. And that really can take its toll on organizational culture and how management feels about senior management. And we don't want that disconnect there. Another thing to reinforce is root cause problem solving. I think we tend to be in a fight or flight culture, and we need to have an instant solution to a problem. But really good leaders will stop, take a step back, perhaps fix the immediate issue with a specific customer, but use it as an opportunity to learn and really run a root cause analysis to find out why something occurred to prevent it from happening. And one method to doing that is to use the 5 whys, ask why 5 times with regard to how or why something happened. Management needs to have clear performance expectations and transparency with employees. I have seen one case where leadership did have a specific set of expectations and they knew what they were looking for in the next review cycle, but they failed to communicate that to employees. And while some people were really happy that the underperformers, and everyone really knew who they are, were let go, some of their friends had noted correctly that they were never told what the expectations would be going forward. And it did lead to some morale issues and actually some additional attrition in the organization. So being very transparent with what those expectations are is important. And then aligning leadership. So process improvement doesn't just stop at a functional area. It's not, our companies are not siloed. Each functional area is interconnected. And those functional areas are also connected to leadership. Having and explaining, identifying a sense of purpose that allows employees to make a connection between their day-to-day work and what the compelling long-term aspirations of the business are. That has to be part of the culture. People need to know why what they're doing is important, why what they're doing matters, and how their very small, what may be perceived as very small piece fits into the overall organizational objectives. Finally, we need to support people and recognize them for the work that they do. We had talked a couple of weeks ago about different strategies for recognizing people and what works and what doesn't. For example, employees probably don't want to take their weekend to spend time with other employees on a paid picnic. That may be one example. Employees may feel compelled to go, but not really want to be there. So we need to recognize them, but we need to recognize them in appropriate ways that is actually considered beneficial to the employee. And that's where, of course, cross-functional teams play a big role, and human resources can help find out, even through surveys, how would you like to be recognized? How would you like to be shown appreciation? And we can even ask employee teams, what do you feel we should be measuring you on? I have had really good success in information technology with that approach. Asking someone at the start of the year, what do you want me to evaluate you on this year? What do you think is appropriate? Here's the organizational goal. Here's where you fit into the picture. Let's talk about those ways that you see and that I see. When we're talking about this again in 3 months or 6 months, what measures do you want me to have used to evaluate you? And that maintains transparency, but it also supports people and recognizes them for the work that they do. And I'm sure you all have many different examples on how to do this. And please feel free to create a new thread and share that in the discussion this week. Some additional things to be thinking about, and since we don't have the live chat feature, I would encourage and ask you to please create a new thread in our discussions and answer some of these questions in lieu of that. So, for example, what happens when improvements are made without all of the stakeholders involved? I know you have shared different examples, many of you, throughout the term. So what happens when this occurs? And does it tend to cause initiatives to wane or even fall off the radar? How can an organization sustain the improvements that quite a bit of resources were put into creating? And have you all experienced an organization that sustained an improvement very well or didn't sustain an improvement very well? I would encourage you to create a new thread and share that as well. And then finally, can you change for the sake of changing? Does that really matter? I know institutions do it, companies do it, managers do it. In the old days of IT, we implemented technology just for the sake of it. It was new and it was interesting, and technology workers didn't really understand in the 80s and early 90s the concept of implementing something with a purpose. And so a lot of things were implemented that companies did not need. But what does that do to morale and staff? What if morale is already suffering and we see a heavy investment in technology that didn't really add value to our clients, while people perhaps were laid off or had to take a pay cut? And that's an extreme example, but there are lots of changes that are made without much explanation. So if you have examples of that, I would encourage you to share. And then how can organizations that are heavily regulated, the drug industry, for example, make improvements when they have the stronghold of generally legislative requirements or regulations around them? What are some ways to do that and ways to incorporate it so that both are met? And then finally, the discussion question for this week, you all know, is regardless of your individual circumstances or a company's circumstances, companies usually ask themselves the same questions, or managers do. Where does the operational full potential lie along the value chain, and how can we achieve it? And it can be a service-oriented company or a widget company. Consider your own organization and its operations and discuss areas that you believe improvement would benefit the entire organization. So in your one functional area, it would have benefit to the entire business, and try to detail and document how, where, and why. Very easy examples in technology. If I were to upgrade our server, for example, from I know my business recently did this. We moved off of Exchange and moved to Google Mail, and everyone suddenly had Google Labs available, and the inserted comments, they're called, let's see what this is actually called here. They're called canned responses, and it's part of Google Labs. So, that was one example of something that very small change that I made that had an impact across the business and improved efficiency. So I would encourage you all to share. It is our discussion question this week. Try to think a little outside the box if you can. I know that you're all working on your projects, and I'm here for any questions that you have. And sorry to miss you this week, and we will chat soon.